Ronia the Robber's Daughter, Chapter 18, the final chapter. Old people have no business to go and freeze themselves to the bone at a wild beasts match, Levis said sternly, when, next day, it became obvious that Noddle Pete had the aches and shivers all over and did not want to get up. Even after he had gotten over the shivers completely, he refused to leave his bed. "I might just as well lie here and stare as sit up and stare," he said. Matt came to his room every day to let him know how the new robber life was getting on. Matt himself was pleased. Borka was doing a good job, and wasn't too loud-mouthed either. Actually, he had his wits about him, and together they were now bringing in one fine haul after another. They fooled the sheriff's men. Oh, it was a joy to see, and soon Matt's forest would be free of all those trashy soldiers. "Brag when you're riding home," muttered Noddle Pete. But Matt did not listen to him. He didn't have much time to sit there in any case. "You scrawny old thing," he said tenderly, patting Noddle Pete before he left. "Try to get a bit of meat on your bones, so they are strong enough to stand on." And Levis did what she could. She brought hot, strengthening soups and other things that Noddle Pete liked. "Get that soup inside you to make you warm," she said. But not even the hottest soup could drive the chill from Noddle Pete's bones, and Levis was worried. "We'll have to take him into the stone hall and warm him up," she told Matt one evening. And borne in Matt's strong arms, Noddle Pete left his solitary bedroom. He was to share the bed with Matt. Levis moved over to Ronia and shared her bed. "At last, poor old thing that I am, I'll just about begin to thaw out," Noddle Pete said. Matt was as warm as glowing embers, and Noddle Pete crept close to him like a child seeking warmth from his mother. "Don't squash me," said Matt, but Noddle Pete continued to creep close in spite of him. And when morning came, he refused to move back to his room. He liked this bed and would stay in it. He could lie there watching Levis at work as the day went by. It was here that the robbers gathered around him and described their deeds when they came home at night. And Ronia came too, and told him about the time she and Burke had spent out in their woods. Noddle Pete was happy. "This is the way I like it while I am waiting," he said. "What are you waiting for?" Matt asked. "Well, why do you think?" said Noddle Pete. Matt was unable to guess, but he noticed that, bit by bit, Noddle Pete seemed to be crumbling away. He asked Levis anxiously, "What do you think is the matter with him?" "Old age," said Levis. Matt gave her a worried look. "But he won't die of it, will he?" "Yes," said Levis, "he will." Matt burst into tears. "No, no, be quiet," he shouted. "I'll never stand for that." Levis shook her head. "You decide a lot of things, Matt, but you won't be deciding this." Ronia, too, was worried about Noddle Pete, and as he faded away, she spent more and more time with him. Now he usually lay with his eyes closed, opening them only occasionally to look at her. Then he smiled and said, "My joy and gladness, you won't forget what you know, will you?" "No, if only I find the right place," said Ronia. "You will," Noddle Pete assured her. "When the time comes, you'll find it." "Yes, of course I will," she said. Time passed, and Noddle Pete grew weaker and weaker. At last there came a night when they were all watching over him, Matt and Levis and Ronia and the robbers. Noddle Pete lay there unmoving, his eyes closed. Matt searched anxiously for any sign of life, but the bed was in shadow, despite the light from the fire and the candle Levis had lit. It was impossible to see any sign of life, and suddenly Matt bellowed, "He's dead!" Then Noddle Pete opened one eye and gave him a reproachful look. "I most certainly am not. Don't you think I have enough manners to say good-bye before I go away?" Then he closed his eyes again for a long time, and they stood in silence, hearing only a few small wheezing breaths. "But now," said Noddle Pete, opening his eyes, "now, my friends, I take leave of you all. Now I shall die." And so he died. Ronia had never seen anyone die, and she cried for some time. But, after all, he has been so tired lately, she thought. Now, perhaps he can rest, somewhere that I don't know about. But Matt walked up and down the stone hall, weeping mightily and shouting, "He's always been here, and now he's not." Then Lovis said, "Matt, you know that no one can always be there. We are born and we die. That's how it's always been. What are you complaining about?" "But I miss him," shouted Matt. "I miss him so much it cuts my heart." "Would you like me to hold you for a bit?" asked Lovis. "Yes, you might as well," cried Matt. "And you too, Ronia." So he sat, leaning first against Lovis and then against Ronia, and he wept out his grief for Noddle Pete, who had been there all his life and was not there any more. The next day they buried Noddle Pete down by the river. The winter had come closer. Now it was snowing for the first time, and soft wet flakes fell on Noddle Pete's coffin as Matt and his robbers bore it to its place. Noddle Pete had carved the coffin himself in the days of his strength, and had kept it at the back of the costume chamber all through the years. "A robber may need his coffin when he least expects it," Noddle Pete had said, and in the last few years he had expressed surprise that it was taking so long. "But sooner or later it will come to pass," he had said, and now it had come to pass. The loss of Noddle Pete lay heavily on the fort. Matt was glum all winter long, and the robbers were downcast too, since it was Matt's mood that meant either sorrow or gladness in Matt's fort. Ronia took refuge with Berk in the woods, where it was now winter, and when she was skiing down the slopes she forgot all her sorrows. But she was reminded of them as soon as she came home and saw Matt brooding in front of the fire. "Comfort me, Ronia," he begged her. "Help me in my grief." "Soon it will be spring again. You'll feel better then," said Ronia. But Matt did not agree. "Noddle Pete won't see spring," he said grimly, and Ronia could find no comfort for him there. But winter passed, and spring came, as it always did, whoever lived or died. Matt began to cheer up, as he did every spring, and he whistled and sang when he rode out to the Wolf's Neck at the head of his robbers. Borka and his men were already waiting down below. Hurrah! Now their robber's life was going to begin again, at last, after a long winter. That delighted them, born to the robber's life as they were. Their children were much wiser. They delighted in quite different things, such as the disappearance of the snow so they could ride again, and in the thought of soon moving back to the bear's cave. "I'm glad you never want to be a robber, Berk," said Ronia. Berk laughed. "No, I've taken an oath on it, haven't I? But I do wonder what we're going to live on, you and I." "I know," said Ronia. "We'll be miners. What do you say to that?" And then she told Berk the story of Noddle Pete's silver mine, the one the little gray dwarf had shown him long ago in gratitude for his life. "There are silver nuggets there as big as cobblestones," Ronia said. "And who knows, it may not be just a fairy tale. Noddle Pete swore it was true. We can ride up there one day and have a look. I know where it is." "But there's no hurry," said Berk. "Just make sure you keep it secret. Otherwise all the robbers will be in a rush to pick up the silver." Ronia laughed. "You're as wise as Noddle Pete. Robbers are as eager as buzzards. That's what he said, and that is why I mustn't tell anyone but you." "But for the time being we'll be all right without silver, sister mine," said Berk. "In the bear's cave we need different things." Spring grew more spring-like every day, and Ronia was beginning to worry about the day when she would have to tell Matt that she was planning to move to the bear's cave again. But Matt was an extraordinary man. You never knew what he might do next. "My old cave is a fine place," he said. "There's no better place to live at this time of year. Don't you think so, Lovis?" Lovis was used to his abrupt switches and was not particularly surprised. "Off you go, child, if your father says so," she said. "But I'll miss you." "But you'll come home again in the autumn as you usually do," said Matt, just as if Ronia had been moving in and out of Matt's fort for years. "Yes, I'll do what I usually do," Ronia assured him, pleased and surprised that it had been so easy this time. She had been expecting tears and shouts, and there was Matt looking just as happy as when he remembered his own childhood pleasures in the old pigsty. "Oh, yes, when I was living in the bear's cave it could have been worse," he said. "And that cave is really mine. Don't you forget it. I might come and visit you from time to time." When Ronia told Berk, he replied grandly, "He's welcome to come, as far as I'm concerned. But," he added, "it will be a relief not to have to see that black curly head of his every day." It is early morning, as beautiful as the first morning of the world. The new inhabitants of the bear's cave come strolling through their woods, and all about them lies the splendor of springtime. Every tree, every stretch of water, and every green thicket is alive. There is twittering and rushing and buzzing and singing and murmuring. The fresh, wild song of spring can be heard everywhere. And they come to their cave, their home in the wilderness, and everything is as before, safe and familiar. The river rushing down below, the woods in the morning light. Everything is the same as ever. Spring is new, but it is still the same as ever. "Don't be scared, Berk," says Ronia. "My spring yell is just coming." And she yells, shrill as a bird, a shout of joy that can be heard far away in the forest. The end.